Has this ever happened to you? You grow up adored. Everything seems perfect, and yet, inside, you feel trapped and unseen. That's exactly what Ron Howard experienced. From a beloved child star to an Oscar-winning director, he hid a side of his life no one knew. Until now. The real story isn't out yet, and what he's about to reveal will shock you. You won't want to miss this. The boy who never stood a chance. You know, when you look at Ron Howard's life today, it's easy to think he had it all. A career that started in childhood, a face the world adored, fame, money, respect. But the truth? It wasn't the fairy tale it seemed. Picture this, a little red-headed boy, just 6 years old, standing on a studio set in Los Angeles. Cameras point at him. Dozens of crew members watch his every move. He's smiling, delivering lines as Opie Taylor on the Andy Griffith Show. To the audience at home, he's perfect, innocent, sweet, the child everyone wished they had. But here's what no one saw. Ron wasn't living like other kids. While they were playing baseball in the yard, Ron was learning scripts. While they were running barefoot in the grass, he was under hot studio lights, take after take after take. Sure, people adored Opie, but what about Ron? Who was looking out for the boy behind the character? He's admitted it himself. Fame stole pieces of his childhood that he could never get back. And you can feel the weight in his voice when he talks about it. Because while the world loved the character, Ron sometimes felt invisible. Fast forward a few years. Ron's a teenager now, stepping into the role of Richie Cunningham on Happy Days. America's golden boy. The freckles, the smile, it all fit. Millions of people tuned in, week after week, to see him. On screen, he was the perfect picture of happiness. But behind that smile, he was crumbling inside. Ron hated the spotlight. He never wanted to be a star. He was shy, quiet, and uncomfortable being the center of attention. All he really wanted, his deepest dream, was to be a director. To sit behind the camera, shaping stories, guiding actors, creating worlds. That was where his heart lived. But Hollywood didn't believe him. Casting directors laughed when he mentioned directing. Executives told him he'd always be Opie, always be Richie, nothing more. Even some of his own co-stars mocked him for being too clean, too square to ever succeed in the cutthroat world of filmmaking. Imagine being laughed at for dreaming, and laughed at by the very industry you'd given your childhood to. It stung, it burned, and it made Ron even more determined. At night, while the world saw a smiling sitcom star, Ron was studying. He was watching films differently, breaking down camera angles, memorizing how stories were built. He borrowed equipment whenever he could, making short films, chasing that dream in secret. Because he knew, if he didn't fight his way out of the box Hollywood put him in, he'd be trapped forever. Can you imagine living with that? Smiling on screen, adored by millions, while inside you're screaming to be something else? That was Ron Howard's reality. And that silent desperation, the quiet, aching fear of being stuck as Richie Cunningham for the rest of his life, that's what fueled him. That's what shaped the man he would one day become. But the fight to break free would come with its own battles. Battles so heavy, Ron kept them quiet for years. Until now. The director who refused to fail. So, here's where Ron Howard's story gets even more intense. Because if Chapter 1 was about the boy who never stood a chance, Chapter 2 is about the man who refused to quit. Think about it. Ron could have stayed safe. He could have ridden the fame of Happy Days for as long as it lasted, cashed his checks, smiled for the cameras, and faded out like so many child stars before him. But that wasn't Ron. Deep down, he was restless, angry even. The world kept calling him Richie, but inside, he was already a director. He knew he was meant for more. The problem? Nobody believed him. Hollywood doesn't forgive easily, and it definitely doesn't forget. And Ron Howard was the nice kid from TV. That's all anyone thought he'd ever be. But here's where the story turns. Ron took a gamble. In 1977, while still starring on Happy Days, he directed a low-budget comedy called Grand Theft Auto. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't an Oscar winner, but it was proof. Proof that Ron Howard could step behind the camera and run the show. And that little movie was enough to light a spark. From there, he worked like a man possessed. Ron knew one failure could kill his directing dream forever. So every project he touched had to matter. Night Shift, Splash, Cocoon, each one was a little bigger, a little bolder. And slowly, people started to take him seriously. The kid from Happy Days? He was turning into one of Hollywood's most reliable directors. But don't be fooled. Success didn't mean peace. Behind the scenes, Ron was constantly under pressure. Imagine having an entire studio, hundreds of crew members, millions of dollars, all looking at you, waiting for you to deliver. One mistake, and it's not just your reputation on the line, it's jobs, careers, futures. Ron carried that weight quietly, but it was crushing. He later admitted he lived with constant anxiety, terrified of failure. Every time a film premiered, he held his breath, waiting for the critics, waiting for the box office numbers, waiting to see if Hollywood would finally push him back into the box he'd fought so hard to escape. And then came the turning point, Apollo 13. Think about it. That film was a gamble, a historical drama based on an event people already knew the ending to. Everyone knew the astronauts survived. Where was the suspense? Where was the drama? But Ron saw it differently. He poured himself into the project, chasing every detail, shaping every moment, until the tension was unbearable. And when Tom Hanks delivered the iconic line, "Houston, we have a problem," well, Hollywood didn't doubt Ron Howard anymore. He had done it. He had silenced the critics. But the climb didn't stop there. In 2001, he released A Beautiful Mind. The film was raw, emotional, and deeply human. And when Ron walked across that stage to accept the Academy Award for Best Director, it was like the final chapter of his redemption. The boy who everyone said would never be more than Opie had conquered Hollywood. But here's the part most people don't see. Even with all that success, even with Oscars and box office hits, Ron still battled demons. He confessed that Hollywood never really lets you rest. One flop could erase everything. And when the Da Vinci Code series faced backlash, and when Solo, a Star Wars story, stumbled at the box office, Ron admitted it cut him deeply. All those old fears came flooding back. Was he really a great director? Or was he still just the kid from Happy Days playing dress-up in Hollywood? That doubt never fully left him, and it grew heavier with age. Because as Ron got older, the long nights, the endless shoots, the pressure, it all started to take its toll. He wasn't the young, hungry director anymore. He was a man in his 60s, looking at the clock, realizing time was catching up. And for the first time in decades, Ron Howard began to wonder if he had anything left to give. The silence shatters. And now, we arrive at the part most people have been waiting for. The part where Ron Howard finally speaks, where the silence that has protected him for decades is broken. For years, Ron never gave interviews about his fears, his struggles, or the weight of his life in Hollywood. He was the quiet, dependable director who let his work speak for him. But recently, in rare interviews and private conversations that leaked to the public, he admitted something that shook his fans. Hollywood isn't kind to anyone, not even someone like him. He spoke about the loneliness that comes with fame, the isolation behind the cameras, and the anxiety that never truly disappears. Imagine this: a man who spent his entire life perfecting other people's stories, finally admitting that his own story was full of scars. He spoke about the child actor trapped in a world he didn't choose, the teenager mocked for wanting more than acting, the adult director terrified of failing every single time he stepped onto a set. He admitted that even after decades of success, the fear never really went away. And then came the hardest truth. Ron Howard is no longer sure he will direct another major film. Think about that. A man whose name is on some of Hollywood's most beloved films. A man who won an Academy Award. A man who shaped stories that inspired millions, is considering stepping away. The reason? The physical, mental, and emotional toll has become too much. The long nights, the endless pressures, the constant scrutiny. It's wearing him down. Fans who grew up watching Opie Taylor and Richie Cunningham may find it heartbreaking. It's hard to imagine Ron Howard stepping back from the very thing that defined him for more than 6 decades. But when you listen closely to his words, you understand. This is a man who gave everything: his childhood, his youth, his mind, his heart, to a career that asked for more than most could bear. And now, he's allowed himself to be honest. And it's not just Hollywood that took its toll. There's family, too. Ron has been married to Cheryl for nearly 50 years, a miracle in itself in the entertainment world. But even that relationship was tested by decades of long hours, late-night shoots, and the constant demands of the film industry. He spoke about the moments he missed, birthdays and anniversaries he couldn't attend, and the ache of watching his children grow up from the corner of a studio. Those sacrifices, he admitted, haunt him to this day. Yet despite it all, there's still hope. Because Ron Howard's story isn't just about what he lost, it's about what he achieved. He turned Hollywood against him, overcame typecasting, and built a career that very few ever could. And now, by finally breaking his silence, he's showing the world the price of that success. The world often sees the smile, the calm demeanor, the legendary films, but behind that calm is a man who fought every day, doubted himself, struggled with loneliness, and bore the burden of expectations no one else could understand. His story reminds us that even the most successful people carry pain and fear, often invisible to the rest of us. And so, we're left with a choice. We can admire Ron Howard for the films, the awards, the legacy, or we can take a moment to honor the man, the boy who never had a chance, the director who refused to fail, and now the human being who finally admitted the truth about the cost of his life in Hollywood. Ron Howard's silence is broken, and what he shared is not easy to hear. But it's real. It's human. It's a reminder that behind every legendary story, there are sacrifices, doubts, and quiet battles most of us will never see. What do you think? Should Ron step away and find peace? Or does the world still need his brilliance? Tell us in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that reveal the truths behind the stars we thought we knew.